that have been to a show the night before are usually completely out of it, which means that then it will go to sleep even before I start speaking. But having said that, I do know that a lot of you will be tired, okay? I really won't mind if I see a couple of people going to sleep. What I don't do is alternative conversations, okay? That simply doesn't work. Well, when I first started, I'll just tell you where you are. I'm actually in the London School of Economics, we call it the LSE, which is basically a division of London University, but really it's a freestanding university. And it's not just one of the best universities in the United Kingdom, which it is. It's one of the best universities in the world. It was described by the Fulbright Commission a few years ago. It's possibly the leading social science institute in the world today. To put it in perspective, I think you call your best universities the Ivy League universities. What we call ours the Russell Group. It's the same sort of concept. You get into a Russell Group university, it's about 7 or 8 applicants for every place, something like that. You get into the London School of Economics, it's about 17 applicants, or about 15 applicants per place. So it gives you an idea of what the compositions are. It also explains, for instance, why 17 previous Nobel laureates have been here, plus numerous Pulitzer Prize winners and people like that. So it's a very sort of major academic institution, and that's where you are. Well, that's where you are, it's not why you're here. So why are you here? Because if you looked at the paperwork for the session, some of you would have seen got up to an hour and a half listening to some Brit banging on about the parliamentary institutions of Great Britain. Great Britain. Oh, that. They've got a description for that sort of thing in America. You know, they call it a cruel and unusual punishment. I'm not allowed to do it. It stands under the 8th Amendment. Having said that, there's actually quite a lot I've got to get to, so I'm going to have to talk for about 15 or 20 minutes or so. But after that, I'll open it up to questions. And when we come to questions, do please ask anything you want. I'll just mention a moment. Don't get fazed by the fact that it's 11 o'clock and Lauren's group have got to go. I just quietly sort of melted away. But when we come to questions, they really do ask anything you want. Because if you're in a foreign country, there's no reason why you should know anything at all about what I'm going to be talking about. So you don't have to worry about a funny question, okay? The only funny one is one which I don't know the answer. But then I'm a politician, so I'll lie, won't I? So you'll never know. Don't know the funny question or not. So really do take equal opportunity. So what's the brief? Why are we here? Well, here are people call this a parliamentary overview. And what they want their lecturers to do is they give you a brief idea of how the British Constitution works, how the law-making process ties in with it, and in the time of Vader, and also seeing some of the similarities and differences in your own system as well. And obviously in the time of Vader it's got to be pretty broad brush, but that's the brief I've got to try and speak to. Okay, so what would I be doing? Well, my name is Patrick Nicholson, but not far short of 20 years, about 18 years, I was a Conservative Member of Parliament. Now, by a Member of Parliament, I mean that I sat in our lower elected house, what you would call the House of Representatives, you would call the House of Commons. So the people who sit down there in the Commons are Members of Parliament, and the abbreviation for that is MP. And when a quick handle on it, the job I was doing was a bit like being a congressman. Now, I was able to do other things at the same time, because our system's a bit different from yours. So for a number of years, I was on Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher's ministers, and she got replaced by another Prime Minister, a guy called John Major. And I worked for John as a vice chairman of the Conservative Party, and these days I'm a freelance political journalist. But I combine that with lecturing on politics here, Europe, and also increasingly in America as well. Now, I sort of give you those files for this reason. It's quite important you should know what I am and what I am not. I am not an academic, and I'm not a teacher. Now, we all know the teacher is always right. Very good thing to remember as you go through life. But I'm not a teacher. And therefore, I can't be absolutely certain that I can give a session like this in a wholly impartial way that an academic will do it. I do my opening remarks, I can balance it up and make sure it comes out that way. But it's pretty likely that when we come to question and answer, someone will ask me for what is, in effect, a matter of opinion rather than fact. And you may find yourself saying, I don't agree with that, or I'm supposed to think something entirely different. That's absolutely fine. If teachers is always right, I'm not one of those. Providing you hang on to that, it shouldn't be too bad. Now already, in the last 3 or 4 minutes, I've used a few words and phrases with which an American audience would be familiar, but remember, it's a foreign country, it may not be quite what you think. So I think that's the job that I used to do as a Member of Parliament. It's a bit like being a congressman. Actually, a lot like being a congressman, that is the job equivalent. But there's one huge difference. Over there in your state, a congressional district will be about 500,000 voters, give or take. In a British parliamentary constituency, it's only about 75,000. And the reason for disparity, it is actually the obvious reason. It's a much smaller country. It hasn't happened to all of you yet. I think at some stage your coach will probably be taken from Parliament Square. And that is our version of Capitol Hill. And compared with what you're used to, it looks like Toy Town. It really does look small. So everything here is on a much smaller scale. I also said that I've been a vice chair of the Conservative Party. And some people say, oh, we can work that out because in the States the right-wing party is the Republican Party, in the United Kingdom it's the Conservative Party, in the States the Liberal Party, the Democrats, over here it's New Labour. So Republican equals Conservative, New Labour equals Democrat. And people do say that, and there's something in it, but it really is a little bit more subtle than that. And I think the best way I can illustrate is to use one thought. You take Bill Clinton, you all know Bill, ex-President of the United States of America, and of course a Democrat. And therefore a lot of people would assume that as Bill came over to England, he sort of naturally gravitated towards the Labour Party. Well, he might, sure, he might. But actually looking at his political values, I think Bill Clinton would be happier in my Conservative Party. I'm on the liberal end of the Conservative Party, no doubt about that. But yes, I'd stick with my Conservative Party. I was once asked one of these sessions, well, what would you be in America? I think the answer is if I was doing politics in America, I'd probably be a Republican, but I would regard myself, what's more to the point, I'd be regarded by other Republicans as a pretty liberal sort of Republican. And when they got to know me, they would call me, well, I actually got called on a section in Fort Worth a couple of years ago. They said, you're really a rhino. Well, I thought, that sounds rather nice. I said, no, it stands for Republican in name only. And they clearly didn't mean it as a compliment. So before an American audience, I kind of pretty sorry figure as a social conservative. But actually, in my system over here, that makes me mainstream conservative, even maybe a little bit to the right of where the party might be. So things are not always what they seem. Now, I've gone on a bit about members of Parliament for this reason. If I can get over to what they do, and maybe a tiny bit about how they got the job in the first place, it will help you. To get a fix on a system that's very different from your own. So I think the first point to make is that in origin, at least, you have a revolutionary system of government, and we have an evolutionary one. Now, what would I mean by that? Because you don't look like a bunch of rebels, but he wasn't always that way, was it? No, he wasn't. It was that lovely English king, George III. There he was, graciously pleased to reign over you. And how did you show your loyalty? You threw it out. Yeah, very naughty. Well-behaved colonials are not supposed to go around kicking out the English monarchs. I mean, it's very naughty indeed, but that's what you did. Then we had the American War of Independence, which was really a win, really. Okay. Yeah, right on. There's over some who've done a bit of history instead of waiting for this thing. After the beating we took your hands in the American War of Independence, we push off. Where are we? 3 years time, down in Philadelphia. Philadelphia Convention, September 1787, where all your forebears got together and basically met to hammer out a brand new constitution for a brand new country. And if you think about it, it's been a great success, because the document written well over 200 years ago now, basically about a lot of plantation owners, has proved so successful that every generation of Americans will make that constitution work in their own time. And I suggest to you that the reason it's been so successful is you had a revolution. You started afresh. Now that's not the way that we do it over here. We say that art just evolved. Its origins are lost in the midst of time. It just keeps rolling along. Now, that's not to say that we haven't had a revolution. We did have one back along. And if time allowed, I give you some of the history, because the history is actually quite fun. But I think for today's purpose, I'm just going to have to say this, that in the 1640s, there was lots of political turmoil because a question needed to be answered. The question was quite simply this: where did power really lie? Should it lie with the government, which of course in those days was the king, these days we say ministers, or should it lie with the people through their elected representatives? And we had a civil war, very unhappy time, at the end of which the king was executed, a perfectly decent code, just got on the wrong side of the argument. And then for about 8 years we had a republic run by a tyrant called Oliver Cromwell. That lasted about 8 years, 8 to 10 years, and then when Cromwell died, the whole thing collapsed. And it was perfectly clear that people wanted the monarchy back. They'd had enough. And so basically, the son of the late king, Charles, now Charles II, was asked to come back, and to come back he did. So 1660, the Restoration, is a big date for us. Because in 1660, the king is back, and superficially, it all looked the same. But in fact, that question I told you about, it's now had its answer, its irreversible answer. And the truth is, it's all changed. Because after 1660, the government, those are the king, these days ministers, cannot raise tax without the consent of the people's elected representatives. And that was wholly new. So from 1660 onwards, the government, if it's going to govern and it needs money, can only raise that money if the people consent to taxation being imposed on themselves. Say in an American law lecture, that means the legislature now control the executive. So that's the job that members of Parliament wrested away from the monarchy all those years ago, and that's the job which my old mates are doing down at the Palace of Westminster about half a mile away, even as we speak. And the question is, how do they do it? Well, I'll tell you, I know there's some of the lecturers doing this slot, because the ex-parliamentarians I mean, they'll take the whole hour and a half virtually talking about nothing but the House of Commons. The House of Commons, the standing orders, the standing committees, the select committees, and people like me love that sort of stuff. We can talk about it for hours, but for anybody normal, it is appallingly boring. So I choose not to do it like that. I'm going to tell you very broad brush how to do it, and we can pick up on the detailing questions and answers to the questions. Basically, in my country, government works on a yearly cycle, and by that I mean that every year, every November, our head of state, and actually Queen Elizabeth II, goes down to the Palace of Westminster, where Parliament meets, and she goes there to perform a ceremony known as the State Opening of Parliament. Goes down there in a four-strong carriage, accompanied by the cavalry, wearing her finers with a big pageant. And from the throne in the upper house, the House of Lords, she delivers what's called the gracious speech. And little stuff to say when it's rather fun, really. She said, "My lords and members of the House of Commons, may God's blessing descend upon your council." And she probably wrote that for herself. But the rest of the speech has been written by somebody completely different. It's been written by the head of government, the Prime Minister, and it represents a statement of everything he's going to try and do in the next 12 months. Take it about 40 minutes, and she's gone. Now at that stage, you must be saying to yourself, this is a little extreme. This is democracy. A hereditary queen is now reading out somebody else's speech. What is going on? And right away, we come to the key difference between your system and mine. Because what is actually going on in the state opening is this. Once upon a time, monarchs ruled just the way the Spirit took them. The American count was a nobody. It doesn't work like that in 1660. Today, Elizabeth wants to reign in accordance with the wishes of her people. So how would Elizabeth know what her people want? The answer, constitutionally, is by looking at the result of the last general election. So let's pretend that the Labour Party are in office. There is an election, a general election, suddenly the Labour Party defeats it, there are now lots of Conservative members of Parliament. So Elizabeth looks at these results and says, I know what my subjects are telling me. They're telling me that they now want me to be advised by people of a Conservative inclination. So who's going to organise that government for it? Not me, not the 1660s. Logically, she will ask the leader of the majority party in the lower elected house to form a government for her. And we see all of this played out on our TV screens in real time on election night. You will literally summon the leader of the winning party to attend upon her in Buckingham Palace and say, "You are clearly the leader of the most popular party. My people want me to be advised by people like you. Will you please form a government for me?" And guess what? They never say no when they're asked that, because that's what they're expecting, and that's what they're invited for. So when the Queen in her gracious speech says, "My government will do this, my government will do that," every government here is Her Majesty's government. And as I say, it takes about 45 minutes, and then she's gone. And then the lawmaking starts. So how's that done? Well, I mean, I'd say that's 3 hours of TV in its own right. But again, broad brush, it works like this. About a fortnight after the Queen has done her bit, a senior minister will come to the secretary, will come to the dispatch box. He's called the Secretary of State, and says, "Look, I've taken one aspect of the Queen's speech. I've turned it into a draft law. This is my bill. I propose we turn it into a law." And there's a great noisy debate. It can go on for 6 or 8 hours. It really is quite so noisy. The minister will say, "This is the most finest product of the human mind," and all the supporters say, "Yes, it really is." And all the opponents say, "No, it's a row of turkeys." I mean, the debates do follow a fairly predictable pattern. And then there's a vote, and the government wins. They always do, and I'll tell you why in a moment. Then when it's finished its common stage, it goes to the House of Lords, where usually, not always, but usually, it'll go through a similar procedure. And then it goes to the Queen as head of state, so she can signify her royal assent to make the law. And she signifies her royal assent by writing at the bottom of the bill in Norman French. Of course, yeah. What other language would you expect an English monarch to use in the 21st century other than Norman French? She writes, "La reine la veut," which means the Queen wants it, which means yes, it is now a law. Now, in theory, she could write something else. She wrote, "La reine s'avertira," which means the Queen will think about it, which means no. Now, let's be clear. If she were to do that, it would not have become a law. She has to sign it for it to become a law. But it would produce a shattering effect in the country. Because follow it through. Imagine what she would have done. She would have been putting her judgment above that of the people's own democratically elected government. And they don't do that around here since 1660. And the last king who tried it got his head cut off. So she'll sign it into law. Now that process of lawmaking, which starts all those weeks ago in August, will take the following July, before it's completed. MPs go over a long recess, they pop back briefly in October, then they go away again. And then, hey, they're back in November. Oh yeah, November. State opening of Parliament, the whole show's on the road again. Now, I said a few moments ago that in all that parliamentary process, the government will win every single division. So why would that be? Well, they are the government because they got more votes than the opposition. Therefore, logically, in between two general elections, nothing's going to change. So, do the opposition get upset? They can't win a vote. Every night they get defeated, have a hissy fit, toys out of the pram, all this stuff. The answer is no, they don't actually. Because they're not worried about the vote. They know they're going to lose that. They are much more concerned to win something else which they can win and which they must win if they're ever going to hold office again. They've got to win the argument. Because when the minister, all those months ago, came to the Spashcon and said, I beg to move this bill be read a second time, he will not in my system be heard in respectful silence. Within a very few minutes, some other MP is on his feet saying, will the minister give way? Come on, give way. That's known as an intervention. What it means is, I want to debate with you this. I mean, anybody can read out a draft speech. Can you actually debate that? And for ministers, there was one or two who try, is I'm wise enough to say, well, if you don't mind, I've got rather a lot to get to, I don't think I'll take any intervention. Suddenly, all the other MPs, no matter how well they'd like to, they wait, what's this? No intervention? Rubbish, come on, give way, give way, give way. And suddenly the place very quickly can break down in chaos. So, in the British system, ministers at every stage of the parliamentary process will push tariff and at times even bullied, frankly. And yes, in the end, they'll get their legislation through. And yes, in the end, they will be given a grant of money to do it, because after all, they are the government, and the government must govern. But if all the government has got to say for itself, at the next general election, is that we've been a really good bunch of guys, we've won all the divisions, that isn't going to work. If they've lost the argument, then they're going down the tubes. Now, I think it's quite enough for me at this stage. I'll turn it over to the question. What I would say to you is this, that if we were still going by if we are still going about 10:15, we'll have lost one, 11, we'll have lost one group already. But a lot of the groups I see, not all, but a lot of them, like the idea of a group photograph, that if you've been doing that sort of thing, if you wanted to do a group photograph, it's quite a good place to do it. Your parents would be much happy to see a picture of you outside the university standing at a Fuji's nightclub on a Sunday night. Yeah, British irony guys get nowhere near, but it's lots of fun, I tell you. So, can I just indicate, does a group photograph sound like a good idea? Okay, but if it does, we can do it outside on the steps of the LSE, and get some good backdrop. So I need to allow time for that. I also need 5 minutes with you at the end for reasons to become obvious. But as I say, I'll only wind it up if it's still going by 4 o'clock. So at this stage, I'm going to help myself some water, and we'll find out what questions you're going to ask. And anybody who's secret, now wake up. Samuel.
Are your two parties as far away ideologically as the Republicans and Democrats are in the U.S.?
I always find this very interesting as a sort of frequent visitor to America, how, in many ways, how divided your political parties are, and yet how difficult it is sometimes to tell the difference between them. Let me give you an example of what I mean. John Kerry, who fought George Bush in Bush's first presidential election campaign, second. You look at those two, and it's very difficult really to see the difference. I mean, Kerry said he voted both for and against the war, whereas Bush said he voted for it. In many ways, they both came across as conservatives at a certain time. I sometimes think if you take the extremes of the Republican Party, if we get rid of, get rid of Ron Paul, something like that, and then get rid of God, I have a screen dean. In some ways, in the broad mass, I think it's almost more tribal sometimes. We come from a Democrat background, we come from a Republican background. What really made me think that? A few years ago, about 6 or 7 years ago, I was actually in Denver, Colorado, and invited round to a dinner party by some people. And we were sort of talking, and I made a mistake, which I never made again, but I made it there. The question of politics came up. And we all started looking at each other like that. And once I've got no idea what. And these were all close friends, really close friends, and yet they didn't know what each other's politics were. Well, here, if you've got friends, part of it, broadly speaking, is a shared interest. I am a conservative. I actually believe in small government. I don't like the idea temporarily of higher taxes. I think people should be there with money in their pockets so they can spend it on themselves instead of me taking it away from them and then spending it back on them. So if that's my mindset, I pretty much like to mix with people like that. So the funny thing is, I think in some ways, your parties are almost more divided, and yet it seems to me to be less actually dividing them. And you and I both know this, that you can get a sort of Republican, a liberal Republican, who on all the social issues, it's far more liberal than a bow-weaving Democrat from deep in the countryside. It's very strange. One of the things I hoped might happen with President Obama was that I thought he probably had the vision and the skills to remind Americans that there is more that unites them than divides them. But I think, to be fair to Obama, until the Republicans can quite sort out what is the base they want to offer to America, I can't see that process happening. I'm not being rude about the Republicans for one single moment, but even if, once upon a time, I felt that the Democrats almost had a fault line running through them. That on the one hand, they were made up of, how can I put it, liberally conservative-minded people, and complete barking socialists and revolutionists who couldn't possibly admit that, because that's not the way to get on in America. And Bill Clinton pretty much sorted it out for the Democrats by popping them straight back in the center ground and running a nice fiscal budgeting thing. But I think for the time being, the Republicans got a real problem. I think the Tea Party moved all correct. I thought it was very interesting to see how grassroots people would not put up with what they were getting from the party they wanted to support. But I can imagine, I wasn't naughty, but I can imagine the sort of people that Barack Obama hopes the Republican Party is going to choose. Yeah. So we can't use no names out back to it. He's really hoping that she runs.
Well, you said that your government has changed like a lot, and it's interesting that we have the original Constitution in our country still. And I know we took a little bit of the key points from the Magna Carta.
Yeah.
Have you guys like completely forgotten about that, or do you still like use some of the points from there?
It's fascinating, Dave. So one of the problems I've got when I do these lectures, I've got to work out, because of the time constraint, how much I can condense without oversimplifying. And it is very true what I said. They went down to the Philadelphia, they got themselves a brand new constitution. But of course, what was informing their minds, most of them, was the only constitution which they actually knew about, which was the British Constitution. And sometimes people say, well, Britain hasn't got a constitution. Well, that's wrong. That's no point out there. Other people say, well, Britain hasn't got a written constitution. That's not quite right either. What it hasn't got is a codified constitution. I was trying to find it because I usually carry it around there. I can pick up the Constitution of the United States of America, a little booklet like that. It's all there in one place. But if I want to think about the British Constitution, I've almost got to assemble it every time I want to think about it. And yes, some of it is in writing, and the source document, the key document, is of course Magna Carta 1215. That's part of your tradition and mine. Now, as it happens, 1215, even by British standards, is getting back a bit. So a lot of the stuff in the Magna Carta has actually been enshrined in legislation. And some of the stuff in Magna Carta is absolutely quite fantastic. The things there about controlling fish farms in the River Thames and how much dower a widow is entitled to get, all the bloody stuff like that. But I think there's also there, which is still part of British law. It hasn't been put into a statute. The rules relating, for instance, to habeas corpus. The fact that habeas corpus means you've got to produce somebody before a court in a fixed period of time. Habeas corpus is literally the latter for you have the body of. And the court would send a direction. You have the body of John Smith down there in your jail, and we want him up here so we can try him. So habeas corpus is still originates from 1215. The fact that the subject should not have his property or his liberty constrained without due process in front of a jury of his peers, all that stuff is in the Magna Carta as well. So you're quite right. It's a big document for us. And lots of other stuff is in writing as well. Statutes, regulating local government elections and things like that. The thing is, it's actually very different from yours. Is that if you have a constitution which is not codified, and it is a sort of state of flux, you need some sort of a mechanism. We're always taking a photograph of it now, because the constitution isn't what it was 50 years ago, and it won't be what it'll be in 50 years' time. And you need some mechanism of freeze-framing. Where are we today? And every now and again, if in fact there's a question, I'll give you one in a moment, and everyone agrees, the political parties agree, all the lawyers agree, the academics agree, the public seems to agree, that becomes part of the Constitution, and you can only alter it by then legislating it away. So the last major question, which evolved in that way, back in the late 1800s, people were trying to sort of get a handle of precisely what was the relationship between, actually I'll say the Greek, because the Queen then as well as Victoria, what the relation was between the monarch and the Prime Minister. Because it's all part of how far could the monarch really go. Yes, the monarch can actually refuse to sign legislation, but isn't that a good idea? And there's a law professor here, Professor Dicey, and he and another sort of academic, a guy called Walter Bagot, sort of got together And they came up with this formula. The formula goes like this. The Queen is entitled to get fully informed by the Prime Minister of everything that's going on. He must hold nothing back. And he's got to listen to what the Queen says about it and give it due weight. And the Queen is supposed to advise the Prime Minister and counsel him and warn him in the light of her experience. But, they said, it is now modern times. It's 1898. It's not 1698. It's certainly not 1398. Now, they said, if those two finally cannot agree, then the Queen must always give way, because she represents the unelected bit and the Prime Minister the elected bit. Now, we now say that's constitutional convention. It is a constitutional convention. The Queen will ultimately give way to her Prime Minister. It's a way of taking a snapshot. Now, right away, I mean, they say, if you know enough about the system, we're asking about Magna Carta, then right away, there's something else which you must be saying to yourself. Where are the checks and balances in the British? Yeah, I can see it. Well done. Where are the checks and balances in the British system? The other thing which your forebears are concerned about, they thought to themselves, you know, if we let this thing get out of hand, the government could actually gang up on the people. So your system is an marvelously rigged system against the government. They feel sorry for the government in some way. It stops the government ganging up on you. You put in the checks and balances. We virtually got none. Because, you know, some people keep saying, oh, the Queen hasn't got any powers. You must be joking. She's got powers your president died for. She can go to war. She sends troops to combat. She declares war. She triggers general elections. She appoints ministers. She appoints people to the upper house. Lots and lots of powers. But all those powers, the way we understand our convention, can only be exercised on the advice of one person alone, and that's the Prime Minister. And the Labour Prime Minister, back in the 1975, James Callaghan, in his memoirs, he said, I came to realise that the British Constitution can only work properly if the Prime Minister is very sparing in the way in which he uses the monarch's powers. And then in absolute real time, we find that Tony Blair takes the country to war in Iraq without ever making the case to the British people for regime change, because he knew that if he did that, the Labour Party would never stomach backing American adventurism. There was no obvious way of raising that on the floor of the House of Commons. It was a very difficult procedural motion to get it onto the floor of the House. If the government had lost that motion, it would not have meant that the troops would have to come back, so we would bring the troops back. And the only way that technical measure was defeated was because the Conservative Party, which is very, very pro-America, and will back America through thick and thin, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, or whatever, actually back the government. And a lot of people here said for the first time, what do you mean that the House of Commons isn't going to have a vote about war in Iraq? Why didn't they know? Because in recent times, wars have been, well, popular is the wrong word, but accepted as necessary. World War I, World War II, Korea. People didn't think, oh, I wonder whether that's a good idea. They knew it had to be done. But suddenly, they said, we want our House of Commons to take a view on this, and guess what? It's all done by the Queen. So there are checks and balances missing in our system that worries a lot of people. Any more from
What would you do if Parliament is corrupt?
if Parliament is corrupt?
Yeah.
Well, we've had a very good example of that in the last couple of years. And I've got to say that by European standards, British politics doesn't do corruption very well. I mean, yeah, we're not much good at it. But they had a go in Italy, what was their time. They had a go a couple of years ago. Members of Parliament get a salary, which is okay, it's twice as much as a London bus driver, but you know, whatever. And they've got to obviously live in London, and they have something called the additional cost allowance, which is a pot of money they can draw on for necessary expenses. And it's tax-free, that's nice. So to give you a feel for it, in 1990, this little pot of money they could draw was £10,000 a year. When I lost my seat in 2001, like 11 years later, it had gone up by £500. Within a few years of the Labour Party coming into office, it had gone up to £27,000. Now, I tell you, it cost me a little bit more than £10,000 a year to live in London. I mean, not much bit of this, okay? It did not cost £27,000. And what was actually happening, when MPs put in a claim for expenses, they were not published, because it was held confidential information. It might involve individual constituents, and their privacy would be breached. So a newspaper actually got hold of the details and published it. And we found the most incredible thing. MPs are having luxurious carpets, floor-to-ceiling mirrors, you know, lots of sort of naff furnishings and everything, and the public were absolutely outraged. And then what they did, the MPs said, well, no, it's all in accordance with the rules. It's been signed off by the Peace Office in accordance with the rules. Who wrote the rules? Yeah, that's right, the members of Parliament. You know, so it wasn't criminal but it looked really, really bad. I say it wasn't criminal. There are 4 ex-members of Parliament in prison even as we speak, and 2 members of the upper house. And what they did is truly criminal, because follow it through with me. Part of your cost could be mortgage payments. In other words, if you were buying a house to live in London, you could claim back the repayments. So if you had a mortgage, you could do that. Some of them didn't have a mortgage. And guess what they had? They had a photocopier, didn't they? Some of them were knocking up fake documents and submitting that. Now, that's awful, that's criminal. Those 4 are all inside, even as we speak. Good riddance and all that aside. But it meant there was a real scandal. And what happened was, both political parties appointed sort of like an invigilator to look at every single member of Parliament's expenses, and members of Parliament were not allowed to use the defence, this is in accordance with the rules. Okay, they were not allowed. In other words, they would say, well, I think that's reasonable, I think you've got to give the money back. And if they wouldn't give the money back, if they just said this is in accordance with the rule, the political party said, if you don't give the money back, we will kick you out of the party, which means that the next election you can't stand as a party candidate, in which case you will lose your seat. And some of the worst offenders, I mean not the criminals, they're in the nick, okay? But some of the, at the high end, bad guys, were told, we won't allow you to stand again anyway, even if you pay the money back. So it was a sort of scandal. But in many ways, it's almost good news and bad news. It looked awful, and it was awful, and it involved about half the members of Parliament to some degree. And yet, of those 650, only 4, I don't know percentages, TTS somewhere, less than 1%, actually were breaking the law. The others behaved badly. And it was a very bad time for Parliament. I mean, this new Parliament, lots and lots of new faces, so many people forced to stand down. And in a way, it's when the Queen kicked in, if I can put it like that. Because of course your constitution is much better than mine. If a new country was going to have a constitution today, we'd have constitutional modeling as well as the Constitution of the United States of America. But there is one respect, just one, which I think we have the advantage on you, and it's this. Your head of state is the head of government. I mean, that is so obvious that many have never even thought before today, and why should you? That you might actually split the function. But it does mean that your president is also a party machine politician. I mean, that is inevitable. Now, some people don't really worry about politics. To pick up on what the leader was saying there, say for the sake of argument, you're a Democrat. You've always been a Democrat. Your father's a Democrat. Your mother's a Democrat. Dr. Dole, he's a Democrat as well. George Bush Jr. does not tick your boxes. No, you don't feel happy about that. And now let's flip it over. You're a dyed-in-the-wool Republican. You've always been a Republican. Republican as long as you can remember. It's all over the place in your own house. And then you look at somebody like Bill Clinton, sit with it in Rock, Arkansas. So, in a way, it almost turns you off. But here, we don't have that problem. Here, we can hate the politician's guts, and frequently do, and still feel good about the head of state and all those emblems of nationhood. And it's not just wholesale, it really does matter. Because in your country and in my country, people don't really like politicians. Have you noticed that? There you have. They really don't like politicians. Yeah. And there's a problem with that. Politics is necessary. If decent people like you won't do politics, politics doesn't go away. It just gets done by people who aren't anything like as nice as you. But it does have consequences. I mean, say for the sake of we had windows and people looking in from the street. They'd say, oh, that's nice. We've got some nice young Americans here. That's really good. We like America. Oh, no. Look what's happening to them. It's a politician. That politician's been banging on, for the last 3 hours. Oh, I felt like that. Some of them. Oh, no, that's really terrible. Because they look at politicians, they know they need them, but they don't look normal. What I do does not look normal. It is not within most people's ambit. But then they look at their head of state. They look at Elizabeth. And on state opening parliament, she's dressed up in a crown. Well, most of the time, she's old granny. Nice big hat, big handbag, and it's getting bigger. What is in it? The nation demands to know. It's extraordinary. Her handbag is getting bigger and bigger. But there she is, everybody's favourite granny, okay? And then you look at Prince Charles, the son, the heir to the throne. He looks normal. He looks very worried in middle age. Of course he does. I was born on the same day as him. I feel worried as well. But he's normal. It's within people's standard experience. Look at William and Harry. Really nice, good-looking boys. Of course they would with Diana as their mother. So when you look at all that, people look at that and they feel much more at home with the Queen and the royal family than they ever do with people like me. And when this members of Parliament expenses crisis is at its height, when MPs are actually spat at in the street, which I don't justify for one moment, but it gives you an idea of the level of outrage. A country in recession, people losing their jobs. I've got 3 children, all professionally. I've got one attorney and 2 child surveyors. They've already been, all of them in their lives, been made redundant. And all that's going on, and you see the MPs ripping off their snaps in the trough. And then people say, well, look at this. Why can't they take a leaf out of her? Little old lady, 85, does 400 public engagements a year. And somehow they don't look at their country and politics. Yeah, they just think, it's only the MPs involved. The system's okay really. That doesn't mean to say that a new country should get a constitutional monarchy, but it's just got that one advantage over your system. Any more to say with that?
How many members of parliament are there?
There are, at the moment, there are 650. Now, there's no great logic to that. The way it sort of works is this, in a very rough and ready way. MPs, I think, have always felt that if they can keep the seats nice and small, it might actually help them to hang on to their seats in a difficult election. And that's because a lot of MPs, not all of them, some of them actually done some research first, a lot of MPs think that if they work really, 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 really hard, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, when everybody else is having Christmas, they're going around all folks home, terrorising this old lady, saying, I'm your member of parliament, I've come to see you, happy Christmas, and all that. And can you imagine? They think if they work really hard, they will help them get re-elected. Now in America, some of you have heard about things called the value of incumbency. Basically, it seems to be in America, once you've won your first term, you get a group of people together that builds up, who they may not be your political party, but they think you're a good guy. They see you a relatively regular guy who works hard. So you can actually have something like the Democrats for Reagan going back a bit. These were Democrats. Well, I know we're Democrats, but Reagan's a good guy. The value of incumbency, incumbency person in position. Over here, it does not work that way. The evidence is actually brutally clear. People vote for you in my country if they like your politics. They don't care what you like as a person. They don't even care whether they share some of your sort of moral view. If they agree with your politics, that is it. So they like to keep the seats nice and small because they think it's going to help them. In reality, it doesn't, I don't think. There is a move afoot at the moment. The bill is actually going through Parliament even as we speak. To cut the number of seats down from 650 to 600. Now, in some ways, the justification is slightly odd. The Prime Minister, very right, Conservative Prime Minister, right, David Cameron, says that one of the implications of the expenses scandal, remember he's in politics and now I'm sort of stemming out of it, he said, people want politicians to cost the public less money. I don't think they do. They just want politicians not to steal public money. That's all they want. People do realise that an MP's got to be paid a salary, he's got to be helped with his living expense. I mean, if somebody says you're going to do a contract for your firm, they don't expect you to pay your own hotel expenses. So I think Cameron's got the justification for it wrong. But the chances are that by the next election, it will be only 600 seats to be down by 50, which means in all the political parties, what will happen is that you'll have sitting members of Parliament fighting to get the nomination for the same seat. There's all be a bit unhappy. But the area is still be much smaller than yours. Much smaller. Any more?
I know our government was very influenced by the writings of John Locke and Montesquieu. Was your government similarly influenced, or was there another philosopher that really influenced your government?
No, it's a very good question. I think the answer is no. You obviously get educated politicians who know about that, but what we have never ever had to do is to sit around a table and think, what are we going to do now? We have got a new country, what are we going to do with it? I mean, think of the debate about what you were going to do with your head of state. There was some talk about whether George Washington would be sort of the first American King George. Would he become a monarch? And they thought, no. Then there's talk about would he be an elected monarch? The King of Poland used to have an elected monarchy. Well, no, so they had a president. So I think all those sorts of things were really informing people. They really sat down and thought about it. But it's never really been done that way here. And also people take their political system very, very casually. I am depressed to have to say it, but I really don't think that even before, the fact that you're on this program means you're not average. 100 here roughly, you weren't just 100 people taken off the streets in America. You went through a process to get your bright young people. But I've just got this feeling that if I just did the same thing in my country, and with 100 bright young people, nobody would be capable of asking. No way, they have no idea of Thomas Paine or John Locke. They have no idea about Magna Carta either. One of the things we've lost in this country, we allow a minor rant a moment. When I was taught in school, I was taught it essentially as a narrative. We were made to understand, first of all, the narrative of history without being actually thought about. We were made to realize that dates to a degree matter. So, for instance, when I was doing my going to university, called it an A-levels, it stands for Advanced Level Examinations. Yes, we did a fixed period in history. We actually did 1485 to 1714, which are 2 days which make sense. But the way the history master taught it, he said to begin with, guys, you've only actually done British history up to now. Now you're doing European history. And he starts off with the Roman Empire. The first term, he just broadly speaking, not so we'd ever be examined on it, okay? But he gave us the backdrop and the narrative. You get people who go to school here, largely in the public sector, but also the private sector as well. All they know about is the Tudors, Karl Marx and Hitler. I'm not being flippant. Many people go through school, they go through university, they study history, they know the Tudors, they know Karl Marx, and they know Adolf Hitler. And so all the other stuff goes, if you think about it, it's bad enough studying any period of history, it's so arbitrary. Chop, chop, there's a chunk of history. And so because we don't teach the narrative, it's very, it would be very, very depressing to those who do know their history. So, I mean, 2 questions like that are not going to have a good short. I'd like you to come on and see you.
Was there a point at which religion stopped or still continued to play out at all in politics?
It's interesting. I mean, I think we're seeing an effect that does religion play a part in politics? And it's a curious one over here. Because, in a way, it shouldn't play any part in your politics at all. You have a complete separation of church and state. And yet, religion is a really big thing in America. I mean, anybody, who's thinking of especially on the Republican side, but even on the Democrat side in a socially conservative area, who doesn't at least take account of a Christian viewpoint, frankly isn't going about his politics in a sensible way. And yet you have the separation of church and state. Over here, we have a church by law established, which is a curious tale in itself. I mean, basically, I don't know how much of this stuff will be taught in America, because it's essentially British history. But you had Henry VIII, the chap who's, sometimes he divorced and sometimes he speeded the process up a bit. Believe it or not, he was a Catholic. He just wanted to marry another woman. Lots of Catholic ones wanted to do that in those days. It's a very straightforward thing to do. You went and bribe the Pope. But it didn't work if the Pope was your wife's uncle. I'm sorry to be cynical, I'm a Roman Catholic as well, but they did things that way in those days. So he was actually theologically Catholic. He was very, very rough on the Protestants. Anyway, he died. And of course his children make up most wildly dysfunctional family, if you think about it. You've got 3 half-siblings, the way you were taught to remember at school, the 6 wives of Henry VIII. Divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. So it's all a bit tricky really, So the first person was supposed to be Henry VIII, and the little guy called Edward VI. And Edward VI had actually fallen under the influence of Protestant tutors. Because Henry, in some ways, he was a twit, frankly. He didn't realize how much Protestantism was going on about him. He didn't actually realize that the Archbishop of Canterbury was a secret heretic and all this. So by the time he died, his son comes to the throne. His son is under the influence of pretty extreme Protestants. The whole country, he lurches over and becomes Protestant. He's then a little guy, very ill, dies of everything, they're about 15. And then the next one comes in. Who's the next one? It's one of his half-sisters, Mary. Who's Mary? She's the daughter of the one that Henry wanted to get a divorce from. And she's an absolutely crazy, barking Catholic. I mean, you couldn't make it up. She goes and marries the King of Spain, who's the #1 Catholic princely one. Can you imagine? The whole country goes Catholic. Then what happens? She dies, no children. Oh, no, not yet. And the next one comes in. This is Elizabeth. Talk about dysfunctional child. Elizabeth was the daughter of Anne Boleyn. Daddy had kind of mothered head off, So everybody wants to know what religion Elizabeth is. And she wouldn't tell them. And the really thing that really horrified them, they thought, could she be an atheist? Now, you've got to be careful. You've got to hear me out, guys. You've got to hear me out on this one. When you're looking at history, it's all very well to use our judgments today to look back. And the first thing you've got to say, how did they feel about themselves at that time? And in those days, to be an atheist was a totally appalling thing. To even think that somebody might be godless, it was a shattering idea. I can't really think of a modern method to convey to you how terrible people would think that was. So they weren't quite sure what Elizabeth was. Of course, the Pope started being terribly nice to her. People were making she became a Catholic. What Elizabeth made up her mind to do, she had some sort of religion. She was quite wobbly. Her first thing she said, in the end is Jesus Christ, and all the rest is trifles. Which is quite an interesting summary of the Christian faith. Anyway, what she decides to do is to get a whole lot of theologians together. So I've had enough of all this ranting and arguments. She said, your job is to go away and devise me a form of worship that people are going to be happy with. And she said, I'll give you this one thought. I do not want to make a window into men's souls. Isn't that a lovely phrase? I don't want to make a window into men's souls. You just want them to be able to get on with each other. So you've suddenly got the Episcopalian Church, we call it the Anglican Church, which is basically got a Protestant theology, that keeps Protestant, but it looks a bit Catholic, got mitres and bishops and all that sort of stuff. And so suddenly Elizabeth created this church by law established, and at a time when in the continental country they're keeping 7 bells out of each other on the grounds of religion, Elizabeth basically got it sorted. Now that's the legacy of the Church of England, and to this very day, the bishops, the archbishops and the senior bishops of the established church sit in our they sit in our upper house. They are the Lord's spiritual, as opposed to the Lord's temporal. And most weeks, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the great bearded state, he will be on the radio talking about stuff and all that. But in reality, religion plays no part in most people's lives at all. And church attendance, to just use one marker, is well under 10%. My local Church of England chapel where I go, sometimes there are 4 or 5 people there. On a big day it might be 20. There are sectors of the Christian faith which are doing quite well. The Roman Catholics are having a real sort of Indian summer at the moment because of all the Poles who are coming over. A lot of Polish people here. If you're down in the London Underground and you can't hear an English voice, it's because they're speaking Polish. It really is like that. So the Roman Catholic Church, a lot of the black evangelical churches are doing very well too. But on the whole, you'll meet individual members of Parliament who are Christian, and that will obviously influence the way they feel about politics. You can't use Christian arguments to advance a secular cause. It doesn't work. And because of legislation brought in by the last Labour government, a lot of Christians are feeling quite under pressure at the moment. We've had examples of where staff have been dismissed for wearing a crucifix. And the Dustin Tribunals have held, yes, that's fine, you shouldn't be able to wear a religious emblem in public. Mind you, if you're a Sikh, you can have an ornamental dagger in your turban. If you're wearing a burqa, you can go to work in that. So you've got all those debates happening here at the moment. There's an extent which Christians over here feel quite under pressure at the moment. You hear long enough, you begin to pick that up. Any more? I tell you what, we'll let these ones just move out at a speed I like that. It's been great seeing you, okay?